laughed at his failed proposal in front of his family and friends, he got the worst revenge. I would have laughed it off if someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be living in my parents' visitor room, unmarried and jobless. My life was stable, I had a good career, and my fiancé was ready to offer me everything. But now I'm a walking example of how quickly life can come crashing down when you make the wrong choices. He launched the relationship by proposing in a stunning way. He planned everything down to the last detail. We met him at a special event with close family members while he shared his feelings through words and delivered an expensive ring worth more than my monthly salary. The beginning of our proposed future together should have marked the official start, though I saw it differently, which created effects I could not reverse afterward. That moment, my laughter, yes, laughter during his failed proposal, changed everything. It was malicious. It crushed him in ways I didn't realize until it was far too late. From there, the cracks in our relationship became impossible to ignore, and my own decisions only made things worse. Now, here I am, left to pick up the pieces of a life I shattered, and all I can do is wonder how it came to this. It hurt me to recall what true joy felt like when I met him, because our time together lasted so short. Our relationship started with the feeling that we belonged together. Our relationship worked perfectly in all important aspects. He brought pleasure to me no matter how sad I felt, because he treated me well while working hard. Our relationship was effortless at first. We shared everything inside jokes, lazy weekends spent binge-watching shows, and big plans for the future. It felt like the kind of love people wrote songs about. I thought we were on the same page, dreaming of the same life, and for a while, it felt like nothing could go wrong. The old saying proves true, as life puts our deepest connections through difficult moments. The beginning felt so subtle that it went past my radar. He began to work additional job duties while I told myself his excessive work hours and sleepless nights must pass through this stage. I promised myself I could handle things slowly. We were building a life together, so accepting small trade-offs was natural. The problem wasn't just the time he spent away from me, though. It was the emotional distance that crept in alongside it. Our discussions gradually became limited, the type you have with a coworker rather than a romantic companion. He was always busy, his thoughts elsewhere, when we were together. He used to look at me like I was everything, and I started to miss it. As time passed, I noticed myself becoming an outsider in my own relationship as Josh consumed himself with work. I kept telling myself that these changes did not matter at all. He was giving us everything we needed, didn't he? Despite wanting to appear independent, I felt my most extreme loneliness deep inside. That loneliness was the crack that let everything else seep in. It started so innocently, which makes it even harder to face now. One of my longtime friends turned out to be the individual who won my heart. The contact began as typical friendly conversations that seemed fated to remain at that stage, but he listened in a way Josh hadn't in months. He made me feel seen again. I discovered a fragment of myself that had disappeared from my mind. From the start, I never intended for anything to come about, and I kept insisting again and again that this was a fleeting fascination. But deep down, I knew. I knew that turning to someone else, even just emotionally, was a sign of how lost I felt in my own relationship. And then there was the proposal. The moment that was supposed to bring us closer, but only showed me how far apart we'd grown. I didn't know it at the time, but that day wasn't just the breaking point for Josh. It was the catalyst for everything that would come next. Looking back, I can see how much of this I brought on myself, but at the time, I was too wrapped up in my own unhappiness to see it. The truth is, I never stopped loving Josh, but love wasn't enough to fix what we'd broken or what I was about to destroy entirely. I let it go, and my whole reality collapsed in ways that were unimaginable to me. The accident happened on a Saturday night when everyone was displaying joy while still chatting and exchanging jokes. The backyard was filled with the smell of barbecue being cooked, while kids played and family members had continuous conversations in a vibrant setting that provided warmth. During the day, he exhibited signs of nervousness, but I blamed the act for performing in front of everyone at the party. He was going to execute a far more ambitious plan than I had expected. The evening went on when Josh insisted that all the people present be attentive to him. By his glass-knocking gesture, he achieved the attention of the group, and the crowd became absolutely silent. Realization struck me as my heart was dropping to observe the next event. the first thing that ran across my mind was not one of enjoyment, but sheer terror. I did not lose my love for him despite the fact that our relationship had a strained atmosphere that lasted long. At that very moment in public, the proposal felt rushed and out of place. Rather than romantic feelings, I was overcome by insecurities that emerged at that time, because of which I felt vulnerable. I was shocked when Josh dropped to his knee and pulled out the ring, not because I hadn't expected it, I knew it was coming eventually, but because I could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes on me. The moment felt heavier than it should have, like I was being pushed into something before I was ready. It wasn't the proposal that mattered, it was the pressure of it. Then it happened. The ring slipped from its little slot and fell to the floor. There was a sharp gasp from the crowd, the kind of reaction you'd expect if someone had just keeled over and died. Josh scrambled to pick it up, his hands unsteady, his face turning red. He was flustered, fumbling, humiliated, and for the first time, I saw him for what he really was. Pathetic. I don't know what came over me, but before I could stop myself, I laughed. It wasn't polite. It wasn't nervous. It was real, genuine amusement at the ridiculousness of it all. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, the words slipped out before I could think better of them. Oh my God, Josh, you really can't do anything right, can you? The silence that followed was deafening. Josh froze. The room tensed. His parents looked like they had just witnessed a murder. His siblings stared at me, wide-eyed. The murmurs started immediately, low whispers, exchanged glances, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than if someone had started screaming. Josh got up slowly, dusted himself off, and whatever trace of warmth had been on his face vanished. His jaw tightened. His lips pressed together into a thin line. Without a word, he slipped the ring back into his pocket. I should have stopped there. I should have done something to fix it. But instead, I rolled my eyes and shrugged. Oh, come on, I muttered. It's just a joke. No one laughed. That night, the drive home was silent. Josh didn't speak, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly, his gaze locked on the road ahead. I knew he was pissed, but honestly, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. He was making it into something dramatic. I figured he'd get over it. I assumed we'd laugh about it later, that he'd forgive me. I had no idea that in that moment I'd ruined everything. I wasn't ready to face the fact that what I had dismissed as a little issue was actually the start of something far worse. My laughing had started a domino effect that would wipe out all we had built together. I couldn't see it back then, though. I didn't realize the damage I had created because I was too preoccupied with my own shame. And in the days that followed, instead of fixing things, I made choices that only pushed us further apart. Josh and I had been, to put it mildly, estranged since the proposal disaster. He refused to bring it up, so I did what I always do, which is to pretend it wasn't worth bringing up again. Every contact seemed stiff as we fell into a rigid pattern, as if we were circling an enormous gap that neither of us was ready to fill. That gap is what led me down a route I never would have thought to follow. At first, I blamed Josh entirely. His withdrawal after the proposal only deepened my feelings of loneliness, making me crave connection in a way that became unbearable. I convinced myself it wasn't my fault, I was just trying to fill a gap that he'd created. It started with someone from work. He was usually nice, even if we weren't extremely close. Our paths seldom crossed because he worked in a different area, but whenever they did, he always made time for a little small conversation. At first it was just casual chatter. Then, one day, I was talking to him about my stress at work after a particularly difficult week at home. He paid close attention while offering guidance and cracking a few jokes to diffuse the situation. It was also pleasant. I felt like a person actually listened to what I needed to say for the primary time in months. From there, everything simply went out of control. What started off as innocuous conversation turned into lunch and coffee breaks with him. On the inside, I had heard I was more intrigued, but I justified it as harmless, saying I was only enjoying a friendship. In a way which made me feel bad, I started to look ahead to meeting Adam, but I kept reminding myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. The breakthrough was at one of those lunch breaks. We'd walked out to a little cafe near the office. It was a secluded place, not near the employees or the standard commotion. As we chatted, I found myself spilling things that I hadn't even confided in Josh. How lonely I was, how disconnected from the life I imagined I desired. Adam listened judiciously, and when I glanced up at him, his face wasn't merely sympathetic. It was something more. I didn't stop. As a matter of fact, I took that step. Over the next few weeks, our communication grew closer and more personal, and we started texting outside of work hours, first about work and then about everything else. Late at night, when Josh was working in his office or had already fallen asleep, I would catch myself checking my phone in the hopes that Adam's name would show up. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Texting wasn't enough later. Adam requested us to get together outside of the workplace one evening following a particularly tearful phone conversation. Even though I knew exactly what it would involve, I was reluctant, but the loneliness won out. I gave in. On the other side of town, far enough away that we wouldn't run into anybody we knew, we met in a pub. I crossed a boundary that night that I wouldn't have been able to get back. I felt a connection with Adam that I hadn't felt in years while we drank and laughed together. I didn't pull my hand away when he took it, and I didn't push him away when he moved in to kiss me. From that moment on, the affair became a regular part of my life. We started meeting once or twice a week, generally in secret and always distant from home. I kept going back even though I said that it would be the last time. I felt like I had been reborn with Adam, that a long-lost version of myself had returned. But the shame grew with every second that was taken. Fearing that Josh would see right through me, I started to avoid him more thoroughly than I had previously. Without feeling such as the worst person in the world, I was unable to look him in the eye. I couldn't force myself to give up, though. Josh, however, was not in the dark. At first, he blamed my behavior on the proposal's lingering tension. However, as the weeks went by, he began to notice the little things, like how I suddenly became possessive of my phone, how I would get home later than usual, and how I remained aloof while in exactly the same room as him. He was looking at me strangely one evening, as if he was trying to figure out something but didn't want to ask. I brushed it off, but the sinking sensation in my gut told me he was starting to figure things out. It happened when I unintentionally left my mobile device on the kitchen table. Nothing explicit was mentioned in the texts I had been sending Adam, but they were intriguing enough to pique my interest. Josh was standing there with my cell phone, his expression dark, his jaw clenched, as I came back into the room. In some ways, it was worse that he didn't quarrel with me right away. He hung up, remained silent, and walked out of the room. The tension within the home was quite different after that. He stopped even trying to get in touch with me and stopped trying to organize things. He seemed to have completely checked out, and for the initial occasion, I started to realize what I had done. I dug in instead of admitting, though. I reasoned that since he didn't care enough about us to defend us, I shouldn't defend him. Even when the strain at home became unbearable, I kept seeing him. I didn't expect the fallout to be as severe as it was, but it was just a matter of time until it all boiled over. Josh didn't usually cause a fuss, but the way he began to distance himself from me in a quiet manner spoke more than any dispute could. I didn't know it then, but he wasn't just distancing himself. He was planning his revenge. And when it finally came, it hit me harder than I ever thought possible. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was, how selfish. I convinced myself that my loneliness justified my actions, but the truth is, I made choices that destroyed the very thing I claimed to want. And as much as I regret it, there's no undoing what's been done. Josh wasn't just planning to leave, he was planning to make sure I felt the weight of my betrayal in ways I never could have anticipated. After that night with my phone, Josh quickly made the connection. He wasn't the kind to draw conclusions based on conjecture, but he was methodical when he had suspicions. At first, I didn't notice the small changes in his conduct. He started watching me, but he didn't accuse me explicitly. The way he lingered in the kitchen when I was texting, the sudden interest he showed in my schedule, it was all so subtle that I didn't realize what was happening. He found out through my phone, but not in the way you might think. One day while I was out, I'd left my laptop open. My messages were synced, and he stumbled upon a notification of a conversation between Adam and me. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The casual familiarity, the inside jokes, the timing of the messages, it was all there. That was the moment he knew, and any doubts he had evaporated. When I got home that evening, Josh was calm. He didn't lash out or challenge me, nor did he say anything about what he had witnessed. He continued as though nothing had occurred instead. At the time, I thought I'd gotten lucky, that maybe he hadn't noticed anything. But looking back, I realized he was already planning his next move. Josh never allowed his feelings to override facts. That's why what transpired was so devastating. He was gathering all the evidence he could in the background while I was preoccupied trying to maintain normalcy. He searched my computer, phone, Facebook, and Instagram. He was building a case, not looking for closure. Then, a few weeks later, at another family celebration, his younger sister's birthday, the tide turned. Everyone was there again, the same group who had witnessed the failed proposal. Josh begged me to go even though I hadn't wanted to, and it would look strange if I didn't show up. I ought to have followed my instincts. It started out in the evening in silence. I stayed alone, chit-chatting and avoiding Josh as much as I possibly could so as not to draw attention to myself. However, as the night wore on, I noticed something odd. Josh was always talking on the phone and hopping from party to party. I didn't think much of it until I saw the looks people started giving me curious, judgmental, and in some cases, outright disgusted. Then, it happened. Like the rest of the evening of the proposal, Josh called for everyone's attention. His voice was firm but cold, and as he began to speak, my stomach dropped. After thanking everyone for coming, he gave a speech about the importance of openness and confidence in relationships. A moment passed before I realized where he was going, but it was already too late. He provided evidence in addition to disclosing the affair. He connected his phone to the TV in the living room, displaying screenshots of messages between Adam and me. Everyone could witness all of the flirty remarks and late-night conversations. I watched as whispers and gasps erupted around the room, my heart racing. Josh didn't stop there. He went on to explain to me how long everything had been going on, how he had found out, and how he had remained silent while I kept abusing him. More painful than any ranting session, his tone was measured, controlled, and filled with cold rage. After he was done, there was silence in the room, with hushed murmurs and some uneasy relatives shifting around in their seats. I wanted to simply disappear, to bury myself in the earth and never come up again. To justify myself, I tried to tell him, but my sentences were unintelligible. There was really nothing I could say to improve the situation. Josh's revenge wasn't just about exposing me. It was about reclaiming the power I'd taken from him. He made sure everyone knew exactly what had happened, leaving no room for me to twist the narrative. And the worst part? He did it with a level of precision and composure that left me utterly defenseless. The consequences of the celebration were immediate. Among our friends and relatives, rumors spread quickly, and soon my social circle was disintegrating. People I used to be good friends with stopped returning my calls. My own parents were obviously unhappy and even looked at me suspiciously. But Josh seemed to do well after that. The following day, he left our flat with nothing except a note informing us of our impending divorce. He blocked me on every platform, cutting off all communication. It was like I had ceased to exist in his world. In the weeks that followed, I learned just how far-reaching his revenge was. Not only had he exposed me to our family and friends, but he'd also shared the story at work. Adam was let go almost immediately, and I was quietly encouraged to resign to avoid further embarrassment. Josh did more than just end our relationship. He destroyed the foundation of my life. And even though I should have hated him for it, I couldn't. He hadn't done anything rational or even illegal. He only revealed the facts, and my own decisions caused the backlash. His retaliation was devastating in its subtlety, but it was neither loud nor violent. By letting the facts speak for themselves, he forced me to make sure I knew that I would have to be held accountable for my choices for many more decades to come. Now that I look back, I can see how blatantly ironic everything ended up being. The very night that started our downfall, the failed proposal was mirrored by the night he ended it. This time, though, the room was not filled with laughter. There was no sound. The days after Josh's revenge were a blur. I don't think I truly understood the extent of the damage until I started to bear the full weight of it. Before, my phone was humming with notifications and texts, but now it was oddly silent. My longtime friends just quit answering. The family gatherings I used to look forward to became distant memories. It wasn't just that people were upset they were done with me. My folks were devastated. Their expressions of disappointment spoke 1,000 words, yet they remained silent. I was unable to avoid the shame of having my actions exposed to everyone I cared about. I tried to convince them of my loneliness and unhappiness by defending myself, but even I found that everything I said seemed fake. I was a social misfit. I was aware that my identity was now linked to treachery since everyone was discussing it behind my back. The fact that Josh accomplished it all so publicly didn't help. He had made sure that everyone was aware of exactly what I had done, not just that I had an affair. I had the impression that everyone had something worthwhile to say about my life. Things weren't any more agreeable on a professional level. Josh's purposeful activities had allowed rumors about the affair to enter my workplace. Adam was fired, and although I wasn't held directly responsible for what happened, the atmosphere at work was so hostile that my coworkers wouldn't even strike up a conversation with me. And when I did attend meetings, the other people's interactions were marred by an uncomfortable silence. I obviously didn't belong anymore. I later gave up because I thought it would give me a fresh start. However, the labor market wasn't so kind. Every interview I went to felt like a dead end, and I started to wonder whether or not Josh's influence had gone much farther than I had previously thought. No matter whatever I tried, it seemed like I would never be able to get rid of the ghost of what I had done. Josh appeared to be doing well in the meanwhile. Within weeks of moving out, he had settled into a new routine. Social media was a painful reminder of how quickly he had moved on. Pictures of him out with friends, smiling, carefree, it was like he was living a completely different life from the one we had shared. He even started dating again. Even though I was drowning in the disaster I had made, it was bittersweet to see him happy and rebuilding his life. At first, I told myself that he was just putting on a front, that no one could move on that quickly from such a deep betrayal. But as time went on, I realized that he wasn't pretending. He was genuinely happy, and it only made my regret grow stronger. Every choice I made, every mistake I made, every situation when I might have done something differently, I couldn't stop replaying it all in my mind. The spiral of self-disgust and shame never stopped. I realized how greatly I had misjudged the impact of my actions the more I thought about it. Josh had loved me, truly and deeply. Even when things weren't going well, he had put effort into our relationship. And instead of relishing that, I had let my personal anxieties and loneliness drive me to destroy it. I pondered how humiliated he must have been when I proposed, how my laughing had broken him in front of everyone he cared about. And by turning to someone else, I had made the situation worse rather than better. What I felt was far more than regret. It was a constant ache, a weight that weighed on my chest all day long. I knew it wouldn't help, but I still wanted to contact him to apologize and ask for forgiveness. I couldn't blame him because he had made it clear that he didn't want anything to do with me. Knowing that I was solely to fault was the toughest part. My own decisions were the direct cause of every outcome I encountered. The loneliness, the judgment, the shame, it was all my doing. The shock of it all started to fade after a few months, but the ache persisted. I was still living at home with my parents, barely making ends meet with menial wages from freelance work. My days were a monotonous pattern of remorse and hopelessness. The few individuals who remained made an effort to be helpful, but even their tolerance ran out. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I deserved this, that I had brought it all on myself. And they weren't wrong. Josh's revenge wasn't just about exposing what I had done. It was about making me live with it. He didn't have to yell or scream or do anything dramatic. All he had to do was hold up a mirror and let me see myself for who I really was. And it was the most inhuman aspect of all. I wish I could go back in time and do things differently every morning when I wake up. However, life does not permit it. No second chances, no do-overs. Right now, all I can do is try to go on, even if I don't know how. And the hardest part? Knowing that I'm the only one responsible for the life I've ended up with. Update. I've spent countless nights lying awake, replaying everything in my head, every decision, every moment I let slip through my fingers. It's a strange kind of torment, knowing you're the architect of your own misery. There's no one else to blame, no circumstances to hide behind, just me, staring at the wreckage of a life I once thought was unshakable. I've tried to find meaning in it all, to convince myself there's a lesson buried somewhere beneath the pain. If nothing else, I've learned that selfishness has a funny way of making you feel more alone than you ever could have imagined, that love alone is insufficient unless you take the time to care for it, and how simple it is to lose trust and how hard it is to rebuild it. But knowing these things doesn't change what I did or erase the consequences. Josh has moved on. He's thriving, and I'll forever be the person who broke what we had. I can't undo that. I can't take back the betrayal or the humiliation, and no amount of regret will ever fix the pain I caused. Regarding moving forward, I'm not really sure where to start. Every attempt to reconstruct feels futile, as if I'm clinging to something that has already crumbled into dust. People don't forget. They don't forgive. And in many ways, neither do I. I carry the weight of what I've done everywhere I go, a constant reminder of the person I became when I let my insecurities control me. There's no happy ending here, no neat resolution where I find redemption or make amends. Some mistakes are irreversible, and this is one of them. For reasons I cannot even explain, I threw away something beautiful, and I will live with the consequences for the rest of my life. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the choices you make now may have a lasting impact on your life. And sometimes it's too late by the time you're ready to make a change. For me, that's the hardest truth of all, that no matter how much I want to go back, I can't. I can only move forward, carrying the weight of my mistakes and hoping, somehow, that it'll be enough.